So I do see that we have about 200 plus guests who have already joined us. And I would like to say a big hello to everyone. I don't want to say good evening because we have panelists and guests joining us from various time zones. And on behalf of Bird Group, I welcome each one of you. My name is Anjali Vathavan, and I head corporate communication for the group. And very, very welcome to you. And this webinar that we're having today, Rebuilding the Treasures of Travel, is a part of Bird Group's leadership series. These were initiated, conceived, planned by Dr. Ankur Bhatia. He is someone whose vision and his vision continues to guide us, and we want to really take his legacy forward. And this webinar is a step in that direction. It's not the first one, and there are a couple of more webinars also planned, which will be coming up very soon. And we're grateful to all our friends and supporters from across the globe who have been here to help us realize his vision. So without further ado, I now invite our moderator, Mrs. Rupinder Barar. We're very honored to have you with us, Mrs. Barar. She is the Additional Director General, Ministry of Tourism, Government of India. Over to you, ma'am, to lead us through this webinar today.
Thank you, Anjali, and thank you to Radha Bhatia ji from the Bird Foundation for setting up a webinar, a discussion session. It could not have been, I would say, more timely because in India, we've just opened tourist visas on 15th of November, and we are welcoming of more than almost 18 months. So waiting for everyone to be able to travel. There is a lot of trepidation. There are concerns. There are, of course, bound to be a lot of issues around: are we safe to travel? Are we good enough to travel? How's COVID? Have there been learnings in the industry? How do we go forward, etc., etc.? So it's a very people who are not just making a difference in the whole sector of aviation, travel, and flying around the world, but also people who've been working through the last many months in ensuring very safe travel and ensuring, in fact, an improvement. And a lot of conversation is going to take us through on how all these brilliant people have actually used this as an opportunity and have looked upon the adversity as a kind of a disruptor, which has led to better ways of doing businesses. So I'm not going to take a lot of time on this part of it. We will get navigating, but let me introduce you very quickly as to all the people that we have, and we will try and take questions at the end if I'm going to leave you with time after my questions are done with them. So with me on panel today, the first person joining in from London is Virginia Messina. Hi, Virginia. Thanks for joining us. Hi. So Virginia represents, as you can see, just at her backdrop is the World Travel and Tourism Council, the WTTC, and she is in London today. And she has a huge experience behind her. Before she came on to WTTC, she's been part of the Mexican government. She's led the tourism initiatives in her country before she came to the WTTCI. And now when she's there, she's looking at a lot of public policy formulations. She handles advocacy, communications, research, digital, and the list is endless. So clearly somebody who has a hands-on experience. So thanks, Virginia, for joining us. I will come back to you with the questions after I've introduced the panel with us today. Joining you and joining us in the conversation is Meke Sheffer. Meke, welcome. And we hope to steer high. And Meke, you are the Executive Vice President and the MD at Asia Pacific Amadeus, and leading from the front, so to say, in terms of how travel is supposed to happen in post-COVID times. We are very excited to have you with us because you've been involved in a lot of B2C and B2B businesses for almost 2 decades. So lots of learnings, I'm sure, will come in from you. You've, I think, currently joining us in from Singapore, if I'm not mistaken. And that's where you live and that's where you work for almost 17 years. And for us in Asia, I think that is a region, it's a hub. and a lot of aviation happens from there. So excited to hear from you as to how things are going to be now that the world is once again becoming a happy, safe place to travel. Moving from you, I am going to actually to Canada, but today to New Delhi. Ms. Shefali Juneja, very proud to introduce a fellow service officer from the IRS. And Shefali was working in the Ministry of Civil Aviation. Before that, she was the Revenue Service Officer, handling very challenging assignments. Worked for 5 years in the Ministry of Civil Aviation, learning the nuts and the bolts of the industry in India before she was selected as the India representative on the Council of the ICAO. And she is mostly based out of Montreal. But today she is home, she is in New Delhi. And we are very excited to listen to what all she has been doing, because I know she's been doing a lot of work around the Council Recovery Task Force for COVID and doing a lot of work on consensus building. It's been a challenging period, viewers. And so how have the different organizations actually been steering the industry in these extremely difficult, unprecedented, difficult times for the industry, for travel, and therefore for tourism also. So thank you, Shefali, for joining us. And it's a pleasure having you with us.
Thank you, ma'am. It's a pleasure to be here. And in fact, thank you to the organizers for having this very, very important webinar today.
Thanks, Shefali. And moving on to Stephanie Siufi. I hope I've said it the right way. And thank you. Thank you, Stephanie, for being here with us. You are in Geneva. So the good part about our panel today is people are from different regions, and they'll actually be able to give you a lot of feel also about the regions and different climates. I'm sure somewhere it's colder than at other places, and some places a little warmer than the others. So we hope to actually get a feel of those places on the virtual platform too. And Stephanie, you've been working with ITA in 2006, and then you moved on. You have been doing a lot of work on human resource training and the ITA training, skilling and upgrading, which is absolutely such an essential part of the trade. Not only now in post-COVID time, but also how do we drive the whole industry through the human resource and trainings, not only in the 21st century. I think it just becomes that much more crucial on how we take this element forward. So we'll come back to a lot of questions that will drive the industry, and hope to get a lot of insight on that with you. Last but not the least, the lone man standing, as I was calling him before we started this session, amidst all the amazing, brilliant, pretty women, is Amber Dubey. And Amber is currently in the Ministry of Civil Aviation in New Delhi, representing Government of India, from a ministry that is key to travel. It manages a lot of policy and operational initiatives of the Government of India as we look forward to reopening with safe and very, very sustainable solutions. Amber has been a part of the KPMG earlier, and Amber was also very closely associated with the drafting of the National Civil Aviation Policy, the NCAP as we call it in India, in 2016. And that's the reason he has actually been picked up to be a part of the government structure, because he was so very closely associated also with another scheme which we are running in India, which is the Regional Connectivity Scheme, the RCS scheme. So because for us in India, the domestic part of travel is also a huge vertical. So thank you, Amber. And thanks for joining in, and looking forward to a lot of conversation from you too. And before I move ahead, I think my first question, Virginia, is going to go to you. How do you see the recovery today? How do you see recovery in terms of the vaccinations that have happened around the world? Is that impacting travel? And how do you see things changing in terms of a more easy space to travel? There have been restrictions, there have been a lot of issues. How do you see it going forward?
Absolutely. Well, thank you again. Good afternoon, good evening, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be representing the World Travel and Tourism Council today. We basically bring together the 200 biggest businesses across the whole sector. And we've certainly been looking at this issue. I'm not going to touch on the impact of the sector that the sector has had, because we know that this crisis has been absolutely devastating. But I think what is worth is to think about what our sector brings to the economy. So in 2019, travel and tourism represented more than 10% of GDP globally and supported more than 330 million jobs. That's 1 in 10 jobs in the planet. So again, we know out of these jobs, about 62 million were lost during 2020. And due to, obviously, unfortunately, all the restrictions, the closure of borders, that brought our sector to a halt. Now, where we are in terms of the recovery, we have seen some strong domestic activity in some markets. So overall, according to our forecast globally, we're at about a 30%. So in 2020, we lost nearly 50% of that contribution, and we've recovered by a third. Now, again, this has been mostly driven by domestic activity, but unfortunately, international visitor spending is still incredibly low. So there's regions such as Asia Pacific where international visitor spending is still 25% lower this year than it was in 2020, which was certainly the worst performing year. So when we look at Asia Pacific, for example, again, our sector contributed nearly 10% of its economy in 2019. And we know it was the fastest growing region, and unfortunately was one of the most affected regions, again, when we look globally, with more than a 54% drop in terms of GDP and millions of jobs lost. So in terms of the recovery, it's around the global average. So Asia Pacific is experiencing an almost 37% growth in terms of GDP. But again, it's mostly driven by domestic. Now, what are the things that we've been pushing for? So of course, I mean, we know the lack of harmonization and coordination throughout this crisis, unfortunately, has had a huge impact. And I think we're referring to vaccines, and vaccines had an enormous impact in terms of the recovery. So regions that have been able to roll out their vaccines at a higher speed have obviously seen a faster recovery. And that's why we've been advocating for vaccine recognition. We know there were loads of issues in terms of the types of vaccines that were in certain countries, actually particularly with an Indian batch of the AstraZeneca, for example, that caused noise, and all of this confusion has been undermining consumer confidence, which ultimately results in booking. So vaccine recognition is critical. Vaccine equity, particularly in regions such as Asia Pacific, as they say, we're not going to be safe until the whole world is safe. And that's why we've been working with organizations such as COVAX, UNICEF, and the travel and tourism sector has been doing a lot from an airline and other perspective to try to enhance vaccine. Health and safety obviously remain a priority, and that will continue to be the case. So these are overall the things we've been talking to governments about. Now, when we look sort of post-crisis, obviously we've been doing a lot of work on sustainability, which is unfortunately the next biggest crisis that our world faces. But I will leave it there. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. I will come back to you on a couple of other insights. But, I think what is heartening, though the times have been really difficult, but domestic tourism, domestic travel has been holding on and is helping the sector to kind of stay afloat in some cases at least. And in India, of course, it's been a very important vertical for us. Also because the thought was that if the domestic travel goes good, it kind of sends a messaging that if it's good for me, it's good for you, kind of a messaging. But what is also of great concern to any traveler today is the entire supply chain, all the components. Am I going to get the same kind of safety protocols all across? And that's where I wanted to bring Mike in. Mike, how do you see the integration of the entire supply chain in terms of rebuilding travel? Because clearly there is fear, clearly there are concerns. How do you really see that businesses need to be sensitized and actually bring into operation things that they would need to do to foster that kind of confidence in a traveler?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. And I think also building on, I think Virginia mentioned a lot of the elements already that are important to rebuild travel and to get that are requirements. we've done some research, and I think regularly throughout this whole COVID crisis to understand really what drives the travelers, what are their concerns. And I think, for example, in India, there's still the biggest concern is that for people still to catch COVID. No? So therefore the safety, hygiene requirements are critical. But also people are worried about getting stuck somewhere. So the requirements of self-isolation or quarantine, and there are also changes in the regulations on a regular basis, has brought down confidence and ability for people to especially travel internationally. As you say, it's been domestically picking up, but on an international basis, it's been more challenging. And so the requirements and the unclarity of the requirements has increased restlessness in travelers to be able to take a trip, and therefore also cancellations that might take place as requirements change over time. So I think what is really essential to get travel back is finding a way to ease some of the quarantine and testing requirements, and to find some stability in those regulations over time, so people know what they're up to when they undertake an international trip. And so really simplifying that travel experience. You said as well, there's many elements. It's about booking a trip, it's arriving at the airport, then the airline, then the hotel. And so how do we create a more frictionless experience throughout? And I think many companies have been talking about that even pre-pandemic. It's actually become even more important now, because whatever, I would say, friction has increased. If you've traveled recently internationally, it is quite a complex procedure. The lines at the airports have never been longer because the check-in procedures take much longer. So it's really important to really look at where are those key friction points now in the process, and how do we simplify that? In terms of digital health certificates, how do we get that into the flow of the systems that are behind a lot of the travel ecosystems? And that's also really trying to integrate approaches from across the world, because again, not everybody will have the same solution into the existing ecosystem of IT solutions. We do also see many of the travel players, especially on the airport side, starting to do investments in, for example, biometrics, to also make that airport experience a safer one in terms of having less touch experience, with making it more touchless, and to also get the flow in the airport going more smoothly, because again, a concern is having to wait, and that creates the risk exposure. So technology will be key. That's definitely what we believe, but technology by itself won't work if we don't collaborate. It's really about collaboration across the different stakeholders, as Virginia said, which has been a challenge, but we do see different parties coming together, and we're trying to really bring as well the different stakeholders there around the table to find solutions to improve the experience of travel and make it even better post-COVID.
Thank you, Vicky. I think that's really an important takeaway from what you just said, is the need for simplification, the need for harmonization, the need for also induction of technology, but also training the staff at the various locations, and also training the traveler. I think, how do you really train both the supply side and the demand side is a question that I am going to raise to Stephanie a little later. But before that, I'm going to go to Shefali, because the organization that she is representing India as the ICAO plays a very important role in creating integrations and solutions. Shefali, how do you see the role of regulation? Because clearly there's been a huge disruption. It, in a sense, gives also an opportunity perhaps to look at things that might have not even been looked at in terms of simplifications or integrations as we go ahead. Do you see this as an opportunity? And also, how do you see policy helping to improve on the issues that MIECE has raised in terms of cross-border travel, particularly?
Thank you very much, Rupinder. And first of all, let me say that this is combining the 3 T's, that is trade, travel, and tourism. I'm really happy to be a part of this important webinar. At this point of time, we have seen certain green clouds in the sky, and we see some revival of aviation, some recovery. And I want to make a point here, and this is basically a message from the industry, that there's tremendous resilience in aviation sector. So we have the industry partners in the International Civil Aviation Organization. They have been briefing us from time to time and helping us take forward what can be the policy initiatives in the recovery. of aviation. So ICAO has been at the forefront from the very beginning, from the time when this whole pandemic started, and aviation was considered one of the real vectors of making it spread all over the world. So our immediate reaction was to have an aviation recovery task force and to bring in a takeoff guidance. And this takeoff guidance, are kind of detailed facilitation measures which go into considerable amount of scientific analysis, that what can be the kind of transmission on a flight, and what can be the right way that the passenger should be traveling, and what should the crew be doing. For the crew, it is incredibly difficult for the crew to go through quarantine. So we develop what is known as the public health corridors, where the crew are sanitized, and they don't really have to go through the quarantine processes. But in spite of doing all that, what really emerged was that we found that there is a complete kaleidoscope of measures that different states have taken in terms of the kind of testing you have to do, the kind of vaccines you that are recognized, some are not recognized. And of course they are, if you had COVID and then you recover from COVID, then and what is the kind of certification you will require before you're permitted to go for international travel. So there were every country was kind of experimenting and trying to understand what's the best way to go forward. So ICAO has been working very closely with the World Health Organization, as well as with the, I think, World Tourism Organization also has been a party to our deliberations in trying to get the political will. I think this we felt was the key that was lacking. And therefore we decided to organize a high level conference, which took place last month. And the whole idea, and this is something that both Virginia and Nikki have touched about, that there has to be a global, systematic way of reopening the aviation sector. So it cannot be, every the puzzle there cannot be different pieces of the puzzle. It has to be a global synchronized picture. And with this intention to get the political will, we had as many as 56 ministers from 120 out of our members of 193 states, 128 states attended this. And all of them said that we really want the aviation sector to now take off, to reopen in a calibrated manner. And we do want to ensure that the testing and the related protocols of health records are not an obstacle in the way. So what ICAO has really worked, and this is, I think, the key in the factor, is that in future, for anybody to travel, health records will be a very important piece of his, documents that he have to carry. So whether it is his tests, or whether it is his vaccinations, or whether it is the kind of, if he has already got a COVID, he's already got COVID and he's recovered from it. So kind of protocols then that he has gone through, all these things will be a part of his health records. And these health records need to be digital. They need to be interoperable. So a person traveling from India goes on to US, goes on to EU, or any other part of the world. This should be automatically, interoperable in the digital systems. And that's the only way we can facilitate the travel, because every country is very, very, protective of the kind of variants that we've seen, and we see how they hit us all. So this has been, I think, the key initiative in trying to once again revive the aviation. And of course, there have been many other factors that have been looked at by the Civil Aviation Organization. It's basically from the terms of what is going to be the needs of the aviation sector once it starts restarting. Will there be safety hazards? What can be the facilitation challenges? What can be the security challenges? What can be the capacity building challenges? So we're trying to look at everything, as things are evolving, and we're trying to see that whenever we are ready to reopen the borders, it is done in a systematic manner. And the kind of reaction we got, at the beginning of the pandemic, that every country they use whatever their assessment was of the pandemic to go on and ensure quarantines or testing protocols. I mean, there should not be so much of differentiation. There has to be a pattern which has to be followed, and this will get the passengers to have greater faith in the systems, and also get them to start planning their journeys once again, especially if it's for tourism or if it's for trade. Thank you.
Thank you, Shifali. And I think that sounds very encouraging to know that ministers from 56 countries actually got together. You've been working very closely with different countries on how to bring in a more systematic way, digitizing data so that people have a seamless journey, but also clearly still a lot of work to be done, I think. And that's why the travel has started, but in some places it is more than at the others. But largely, I think the steps are still baby steps. But, and that's why, but we also have today's session, which is being called as Rebuilding Treasures of Travel and Lost, but Now Found. I think so. I don't think we could have had a better title to today's session, because yes, world is coming back, but then also coming back with a lot of that. Moving from there, and to Stephanie on that, you've been with ITA leading since January 2019, and soon after that, I think you've been given the huge challenge of moving into a very different kind of a training space, right? But I was reading your CV, your bio, which says with your energy and enthusiasm, and I love both those words, and say that you are on a mission to create the innovative and flexible platform of ongoing learning industry needs. And believe you me, I think you need all your energy and enthusiasm, right? Because never has there been a better chance to innovate. So how are you looking at the whole thing as an opportunity to innovate, and also trying and create a lot of stress that would be created both for the supply side also, because there's a lot of learning that's suddenly required and a lot of recalibration that would be required. And there are obviously concerns on both sides. How do you see handling it, and how do you see it forward from here?
Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to be here. So good morning, afternoon, evening to everyone. I've been listening to the other panelists, and actually this is the same thing that I'm going to say, but from a human resources perspective. I believe that with this crisis, I'm not going to tell you don't know, but we've been staying quite isolated. Some families have been separated for a long time, and several aviation organizations in our industry had to apply unprecedented measures like laying off massively their employees during the crisis. This has created a high level of stress and uncertainty. But what we've seen after the shock is that people starting to look into other options and reorient themselves. And even now, we even see, as the industry restarts, an opposite trend emerging. The shortage of skills is actually knocking out doors, believe it or not. But while it was mainly focused in the US, as we were saying, some domestic traffic has been helping this restart earlier than others. They were facing that before, I would say, other regions, but now all the regions are facing it. So the topic of shortage of resource was actually back in the time by large announced before the crisis, but now it comes back. So what we did as an industry association, we're trying now to understand what are those skills, the critical skills in need for our industry. And we look at all functions needed to operate a safe, secure, and sustainable industry, as Shefali was saying. And to that end, we've been creating a new aeronautical skills working group. And our mandate is actually to help the industry regrow by determining and reaching alignment on the most critical skills. We've been identifying a number of problem statements, like resources planning, so highlighting the challenges that the HR leaders are facing now in properly forecasting for people. Flight operations related issues like recency requirements, regulators, flexibility, the loss of experienced personnel. In ground ops, such as in maintenance and tech ops as well, we see also the need to have more harmonization of mutual recognition, the need of digital competencies, but also there's a lack of attractiveness. There's a global concern. We are really failing at attracting talent in our industry because of what happened. It's an uncertain place to work. So we are gathering right now some information, and we will most likely run a survey next year to really understand what are those best practices that people have been putting in place, and also see how and if we can do something at a global level to support this capacity building in this historical restart. So now, what do we need to do? It is true that it is absolutely great to see our industry restart. And we dare even being more optimistic. At our annual general meeting held in Boston in October, we described it as a cautious optimism. Why? Because we do face several challenges. We need to team up, as the other panelists said, in order to fix it. I don't know how many of you have been traveling and experiencing what Miki was saying earlier, but we do literally spend hours in checking and rechecking regulatory requirements, doing PCR, date to date at, and whatsoever tests that we can think of. We want to be sure that we have our papers in our hand, okay? So the very first thing, as Miki was saying, we need to simplify the process. At IATA, we've been creating this IATA Travel Pass. This is very much to support, as much as we can, the resolution of that complexity that arose from the pandemic. The whole idea here is to enable passengers to check and prove they meet COVID regulations before arriving at the airport, to limit actually this queuing effect that we're having there. So immediately, as Shefali was saying, it is true that we want to simplify the process, but still maintain this number one priority that we have all in mind, which is the safety. We are a very highly regulated industry, and we absolutely want to maintain that safety. So we are creating as well courses around the safety culture, because we're going to be onboarding new joiners, people who have never been working in this industry. So they need to understand what the safety culture is that we know when we're working in this. And maybe I would end with the future. That is ahead of us, with this great priority on sustainability. At the last AGM, so annual general meeting, a resolution was passed by IATA member airlines, committing them to achieving net zero carbon emissions from their operations by 2050. This pledge brings air transport into line with the objectives of the Paris Agreement to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. The net zero objective will be met through a number of factors. One of them will be the use of sustainable aviation fuel, okay? And that will require collaboration, as you can imagine, among all stakeholders who will be involved in making that happen. So again, what we're trying to do in terms of reskilling and building up capacity for the industry, we want to enable this collaboration, and we are developing things and courses to actually bring this knowledge to the whole value chain so that people involved can make this happen, okay? From investors to airlines, airport one handlers, everybody has something to do, including the young generation who wants to be part of this challenge. So yes, I would say that there is a great place for education within our industry, as we can build the future of aviation to be better for and with our kids. If you look at that, the leaders who will fly the SAF, the Sustainable Aviation Fuel, they are 15 years old right now. Huh? So we want them to understand they can be part of this historical restart, where they can design the aviation they want to fly with.
Stephanie, I picking two, words, two phrases: cautious optimism and a restart kind of a thing. And yes, I think you are handling one of the toughest parts, I would say, of the whole thing, because handling human resource and going through unprecedented crisis that all of us perhaps living today have not really been a part of. The last mega crisis that the world faced was when World War II happened, and I think most of us weren't even there then. And handling this kind of a crisis is something that our generation probably has not really witnessed in this scale and magnitude, which has literally touched every corner of the world. And while in a sense the world has become flat and the world has become a smaller place with all the connectivity, but that itself became a challenge, because something that we were all assuming to be so much a part of our life just came to a standstill. And the sector that I represent here, tourism, Tourism just cannot happen without travel. Though there's been a lot of talk of virtual experiences and all, but we all understand that there's nothing like going and actually experiencing a place, going and living there, meeting the people there, having the food the way you want to have it in local places. So we are, of course, looking forward to the revival, but clearly challenges remain and a lot of homework cut out for all of us. Which brings me to our representative from the Ministry of Civil Aviation in India, who is handling a very significant part of work in the ministry. As I said earlier, he's been part of the drafting of the aviation policy in India. And today in the ministry, he's handling the IT part of it, the information technology, drones, and skill development, all three very crucial areas of work. And before we move to the drones, in fact, I'm going to ask Amber that Amber, domestic tourism has picked up in a reasonably big way. We can say we are able to fly fairly safely. Of course, there have been queues at the airports. It has been a bit of a harrowing experience because it's been different airports, different requirements. The personnel at the airport is sometimes not really aware enough, and everybody's scared. And so therefore, the fear factor is sometimes pushing us to be overcautious. And there have been, of course, many memes and jokes and all kinds of things happening also on that. But in India, and India integrating along with India travel with the rest of the world, how do you see it going forward? And how do you see technology really entering into our airports and making sure that now that we've opened to the world on 15th of November, how to make sure that we don't have those queues and people actually entering and going back to their homes with a feeling that they had a fairly safe experience?
Thank you so much, Rupinder. I think these are very interesting questions. There are a series of questions, so I'll take some time to answer these. But before I start, I just want to say how honored I feel to be part of this group. Of course, I'm the odd man out, and I actually begged and cajoled Radha ma'am to let me be more a part of audience and applaud rather than be part of the group. But then, Radha ma'am, the tigress that she is, when she says you show up, you show up. So no questions asked. So thank you so much. And also, before I start, a big tribute to the women in aviation. I think they're playing a huge role, like in healthcare and banking and telecommunications and so on, media and so many industries which are actually dominated by women. And even in our ministry, like in tourism, some of our biggest decision makers are Usha ji and Rubina and Garima, and before that Vandana. And Shefali ji was also part of us earlier. She's still part of us, but now handling a much bigger role in Montreal. So it's all women power. And it's also symptomatic of what is happening in the aviation industry also, where heavily dominated by ladies, and so much we are so much fortunate for that. Coming back to the pandemic issues, yes, of course, once in 100-year phenomenon. But as many of our illustrious leaders on the panel said earlier, aviation people are a tough nut to crack. I mean, we are the most vulnerable in terms of pandemics and epidemics and volcanic eruption somewhere in Iceland, and that disrupts schedules all over, diseases, I mean, wars. You name a problem, and we are the most sensitive because aviation is one of the first things to be shut down in case of any risk to human, to passengers and to assets. So, but the beauty is that we always bounce back, and that's why none of us who are on the panel ever regret being in aviation or tourism, because we always know that we've chosen the right line and the right profession. And every time we are pushed, as they say, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And we, out of this pandemic, I'm so proud with all my fellow panelists that we're very proud that we've come out of it. Okay, the war's still not over, and yes, we are in that last mile, but all indications show that the third or the fourth wave either will not come, or even if it comes, it will be almost like non-noticeable. Even in India, as you know, we've crossed almost 110 crore people, 1.1 billion people. That's almost 1.5 times the population of entire Europe, and maybe 3 times that of US. With all our challenges and poverty and lack of medical infrastructure, we've reached that 1.1 billion mark. The number of the infections and the people who are down with COVID is a very small number as compared to the 1.4 billion population that we have. So it's been a great success. Often India doesn't get the sort of attention it deserves, but frankly, it doesn't really matter. We're doing what we had to do. Now coming back to the aviation part and tourism part, very heartening to note that we've almost touched about 85-90% on the domestic side. International, of course, is a challenge, and I'm sure, as Rupinder ma'am also said, we will be opening up very soon, and that will see a surge of people because, I mean, Indians, every fifth person on the planet is an Indian. So we are spread all over the world, whether it's a low-income worker in the Middle East or other parts, or the high-end Sundar Pichais and Nadellas in the US. I mean, all of us need to connect back to our families. Most have not met each other for almost 1.5, 2 years. So we expect like a huge and a massive surge of revenge travel and revenge tourism. People just need to get out of their homes, even if it's like in the same city. We are noticing people are stepping out of their homes and going to a hotel in the same city just to spend the weekend and come back home, just to get that little mental health issue sorted out, because all of us are sick and tired of being sitting at home. Now, we in the government, of course, we've been working all through the last 2 years. As I say, the military, the police, the health system, and the government system never shuts down. So we've been going to office every day. I travel 32 kilometers from my home in Gurgaon to Delhi and come back. Of course, there are a lot of people who are very scared with what we do, but then we do what we do, and we're still alive and kicking on this panel. Rupinder ma'am spoke about technology. Now that I would say is one of the biggest achievements of this COVID pandemic. As I say, what has to happen will happen, but every calamity is an opportunity, and smart people always convert that into an opportunity. So we tried our best, and if you see lots of things which we were planning for decades, and talking about contactless travel and paperless travel and this and that and online working, so on and so forth, we were mostly discussing budgets and all that, but one pandemic and it's all gone. So now there's no stamping of the boarding passes. A lot of that is now online. They were tagging all the bags. So much has been taken out in the name of COVID pandemic, and we'll only become more and more contactless and paperless as you travel forth. Yes, ma'am, you're right that at the airports now. See, when we went down, we had to reduce people because unfortunately we had to let go of people. But then now all that is being brought back, and yes, with the sudden surge that we've seen, because our festival season starts in October, and we've seen an unprecedented surge, in fact, far beyond whatever we were projecting. So yes, there is some congestion at the airports, and we're trying to figure that out by getting more automation, more mechanization, and more people being pumped into it. At the same time, we're also expanding our airport infrastructure. The airlines, despite this pandemic, there's a new airline, Akasa Air, and just 2 days back at Dubai Air Show, they have just ordered another, I think, 72 aircraft order. Okay, and the current ones, the big ones like the Indigos, etc., are already expanding. And Air India has also been sold out, a national airline, and Tatas have purchased it. So all these are green shoots which tell you that these are very, very hard-nosed professionals and with eye on the ball. Everything's based on cash flows and projected cash flows. So they're not going to invest, set up new airlines, expand capacity, and buy out a government airline unless they see value. I'm also the Vice Chancellor of our National Aviation University. We're seeing no reduction in people who are interested in aviation. Right next to our university is the largest flying academy called IGRUA, Indira Gandhi Rashtriya Udan Academy. That academy is also seeing unprecedented interest. So all over we see that everybody understands that this little blip, okay, once in a century kind of an event, but it's just a once in a century kind of an event. But education is forever. Epidemics are for a short time, and education is forever. So just like Stephanie was mentioning earlier, we have to focus a lot on skill building and education, because the quality of professionals, I mean, we've done whatever we did, and now we have to hand over the reins to our next generation, and they have to be absolutely top quality. So a lot of focus in India, especially, we are giving on technology and skill development. Rupinder?
Thank you, Amber. I think that was a very, quite a comprehensive overview of things, the way they are evolving. And I'm, looking at my watch and happy to see that I still have time for a quick round of a conversation with all of you. And I'm going to go back, therefore, to Virginia to ask you, Virginia, that I know that WTTCI, in fact, started doing a lot of research at the outset when the pandemic happened. And as we've heard our panelists today, there is a lot of role of communication as we are finding air travel picking back. What kind of change do you see? And especially because what Stephanie has touched is a very significant point of the message of sustainability. And there has been a conference very recently on climate change and the need to adapt to carbon neutral technologies, aviation fuel. Of course, that's a very different subject. We don't have so much time today to touch on it in detail. But how do you see communication changing in the post-COVID? And how do you see it as an opportunity, in fact, for us to use it as a fresh reminder on how we need to craft travel as we go forward in this century?
Sure, that's a great question. And as we say, with every crisis comes opportunity, right? And I think, I mean, what are the opportunities we see arising from this crisis? First of all, I think there's an element of the appreciation of travel and tourism, because again, as we've been saying, people have been in lockdown, have not been able to travel for work, but also that means they haven't been able to reach their families, their friends, and that has had a huge social impact, as Stephanie was explaining, from a human perspective. So there's an appreciation in the sense that travel and tourism is not just what the economic impact I was talking about, but also it means much more in terms of the livelihoods, in terms of the communities, even in terms of the wildlife and biodiversity. I mean, we've been in conversations with African parks that are really struggling now because of the lack of tourism. So I think in a way there's been sort of an element of appreciation. Then, I mean, some of the colleagues here talked about technology. We're certainly leapfrogging when we're looking at border processes. I mean, we've been hearing about different solutions such as the IATA travel pass and many others that are around. And I think really these type of solutions will help us as we emerge from this crisis, because we know travel will pick up, but we need these processes to be seamless and to be efficient. And we know from a government perspective, I mean, we need to prioritize health. We need to avoid the spread. So if there are technologies or solutions that will be able to prove a passenger's COVID status via digital tool, obviously that will help us have a seamless experience, which is what everyone's looking at. And then there's the element of sustainability, this sort of enhanced sense of wanting to travel for the good, wanting to make sure that when we travel, we're having a positive impact, we're consuming local, we're impacting the whole supply chain in a positive way. And it's not only happening, obviously, at the policy level. We've just seen the big conference happen in Glasgow. Actually, we took part of that, but it's also the consumer level. So I think there is an enhanced sense of doing the right thing. And there's a number of efforts now from, for example, all the big OTAs such as Google, Booking.com, now really being to show what a sustainable choice is, how to make sure that we're making these choices. And from the private sector perspective, we actually launched a big net zero roadmap for the sector. So again, what does it mean for a sector to be net zero by 2050? We're a very diverse sector. I mean, Stephanie was touching on aviation and the importance of sustainable aviation fuels, but throughout our sector, if we think about accommodation, if we think about tour operators, it's so diverse that we really need a very specific approach. So we are providing a framework and some recommendations, and also identifying, of course, what the challenges are, but hopefully we need more will to go into that from both the public sector as well as the private sector to achieve this. So that's what I would highlight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Virginia. And Mika, very quickly to you. There is an opportunity in adversity, and there is a lot of digital and helping to scale up businesses as we go forward, because there is a lot of ground to be made. So there is opportunity here, but how do we scale it up?
Sorry, I couldn't fully hear your question, but I'm
just going to spell that again. That how do you see in times to come technology helping businesses to scale their operations, especially to make up the lost time that the last 18 months have been so disrupting?
Yeah, so we see businesses across the value chain of travel investing in technology. There's a big focus initially on automation. Because again, especially when in the beginning, when all the cancellations happened, it was clear that the process of changing tickets, reissuing, putting credit in there was not an automated process. So there's been a lot of investments from across the industry to automate that, and that will be better for the future. No, it will enable travelers to make their own changes. It will give people access. There's also a lot of investment that's happening, as we've talked about, the digital health certificate, and right now that is COVID. But I think there's other elements of health certification, vaccination that was required prior to COVID. And also, especially, we see the opportunity for more digitalization of identification, but documentation, because that can also simplify the process. It's been always a very manual process. With the acceleration investments in technology to digitalize right now the vaccination test certificates, that technology can also enable the identification process throughout the whole travel experience. And last but not least, it's really also about getting information to travelers. Travelers right now are scrambling to get information. People want to have that information at their fingertips, and that information needs to be dynamic. No, it just changes all the time. So it's really bringing that to travelers. And what really lies underneath all of that is an investment in personalization. And NDC, for example, is one of those key investments in the aviation area, where people were a bit worried with COVID if that would slow down, but actually we've seen acceleration and adoption. People are taking the opportunity, especially on the airline side, but also on the travel agency side, to make those investments right now, to be ready when the recovery comes, to really have the latest technology, to really make those personalized offers and solutions and retailing solutions towards the travelers, really to make the travel experience better. Thank you. And thank you for enabling me to share here also our perspective, and for the invitation. I think we have a few technology issues, but I think we'll go through there from here.
Challenges of technology on my end.
I was going to say technology challenges are everywhere still. It's not smoothness, but again, we test and learn.
Sorry, I lost you for a minute. On Zoom, I think that's the learning. But going forward to Shefali at that point, I'm going to ask you, Shefali, that with so much of digital documentation happening and the world actually moving ahead, how do you really see the solution to that? Do you really see that people are going to build a global consensus for travelers? Because every time you land in a different jurisdiction, there is a new regulation to be read, and that's half the reason why people are not traveling today, because they're like, when we land somewhere, we really don't know what we may be confronted with. How do you see the consensus building happening? Do you see it at all happening or not? And how soon, should I say, do we see it happening?
Thank you, Madam Brar. It's first of all, this is something I would have highlighted in my earlier intervention. Basically, what ICAO is looking at one vision for aviation recovery. It is talking in terms of something beyond the global pandemic. And what it has proposed is that what we need is a multi-layered strategy in civil aviation, which has to be acceptable to all. And there is also a very important concept here of non-discrimination, because we need to know that vaccines are still not available in all parts of the world. So there is also different thoughts as far as the scientific evidence is concerned of vaccination, of testing, of recovery from COVID. So ICAO has been working again with the real experts here on the field, the aviation medical professionals, in trying to work out that what can be the best way forward. And it has said that it is important to have a exit strategy for every state. So it was very easy for the states to lay down their rules for stopping the flights, but now it's time for them to develop their strategy. And how they can do it has to be through risk management. So they have to have a risk management. They have to need to see that what are the public health risks, how are they going to gradually, in a calibrated manner, open travel. They have to also look at the economics of travel. I mean, it is a fact that travel enables trade, commerce, as well as brings employment. So these are things that the states need to look, and ICAO has been very forthright that these are completely sovereign issues of every country. But what it is looking at, having one vision, so that there is not much problem when a traveler sets out. he knows what is going to be the grind, and he's able to accordingly plan his itinerary. What IFAS also proposed is, encouraging the transportation of vaccines, because we have to ensure that if there is any part of the world which is not vaccinated, it's a risk to the rest of the world. So we have to ensure that the medical supplies, essential supplies, as well as vaccines are supply chain is constantly maintained. ICAO has also talked about the fact that there is need to strengthen, technical support to many states. It has developed what is known as the IPACs. So IPACs is basically a way of strengthening some states in their technical capability of meeting with the requirements laid down by ICAO for enabling travel. They've also tried to go on for supporting many states based on the issues raised by them. ICAO is also stressing on what is known as, and the panelists have also, especially Amber has talked about the idea of safe contactless travel. So it's important to have integrated, automated, digitalized solutions for it. There is need for the new technology to be agile in responding to the new treatment methods that are available. Passenger testing, as we very well know that in the United States, they have gone for antigen testing, and RT-PCR is not required, which is like 1/3 of the cost, one could say. So, and definitely the RT-PCR test cost also are very important part of itinerary of a passenger. It adds to the health, to the cost of the passenger. So there has to be a significant component of overall look as to what kind of the teething problems we're going to have when we're trying to reopen aviation. And Stephanie is very well touched upon, need for the competent aviation professionals and engagement of the states, and when ICAO talks about all as 193 member states, that they need to retain their existing qualified professionals as well as attract more professionals into it. So I think there is no simple way of answering how we can do it. It has to be a multi-sectoral effort. And I think we're all working towards it, and definitely the green shoots are already visible. Thank you.
Thanks. So that's a positive note that green shoots are visible. But Stephanie, I think the role cut out for you guys that retaining talent, and also not only retaining but upskilling the talent in so much innovation that is expected out of the situation in terms of use of technology. What do you see as the time graph when you feel that the staff and the people in this industry are actually going to feel comfortable about their own ability to handle the crisis?
Mm-hmm. I believe if we look at, if I would be an HR aviation industry leaders today, I'll be facing with the challenge of properly identify which skills I need. I need a set of skills right now. But it's true that the air traffic has increased at uneven speed in different locations. The constantly changing rules make it increasingly difficult to plan resources. So I would say the very first thing to do is for these HR leaders to really understand what they need now to restart, okay? And then as well to plan for future. What are the skills that will be needed? Those digital skills, these data literacy type of skills that we expect to see in the coming future. So I believe that, as Stephanie was saying, the very first challenge is we need to find ways to attract new talents and retain our employees. And I'm sure that if I would be asking the audience what innovation means to you, some will say digitalization, some others will say the famous line about seeing things with different eyes. So I believe that the most important in terms of reskilling is really to understand a few things. First of all, we forget what we learn if we don't apply it. And people who will be joining this industry now will need to be reassured that they're going to be entering a company, an organization that is ongoing developing myself. So if I join an aviation, an airline, for example, how am I going to be sure that continuously I'll be learning. That is the most important thing. So as an HR leaders, we need to ensure this kind of ongoing learning culture, so to say. So it's really about shifting from delivering a training to facilitating a learning. So I would say, if you look at the first things to do will be to identify within our current people and existing staff who are the ones who can actually help others, then identify this competence we need right now and the competence of the future. We have one of our advisory council, which is the digital transformation one. They said, let's make sure that we're not going to fix the problem of the past by reskilling people with current skills, but also trying to identify those future ones. It is true that digital competencies are needed across the board within all functions, but how to actually make that happen is by sticking to the reality of the different paths of digitalization project as the organization is going through. So I think if we have to retain one thing, is that it is all about instilling this continuous learning culture. It is all about retaining our talent, and the key to retaining the employees will be to develop them. New technologies will emerge, things will change. We cannot really be sure which ones is going to take over compared to the others. But what we know is that digital transformation projects are happening as we speak. And the more we are flexible and agile in the way we are providing development opportunities to our employees, the best will it be. So this will support the success of digital transformation projects, and because the employees would understand why we implement change and how they contribute.
Thank you, Stephanie. I think that a conversation with all of you is already creating a lot of hope in somebody like me when I'm listening to you. And I'm sure to everybody else that there is a lot of clarity on strategy. There is a lot of clarity on the way forward, and things are happening. So I think that should lead us to a more confident future. And with Amber, I'm not sure whether I am asking you a question which is relevant to today's conversation, but I can't resist because I saw in your profile that you're handling drones. How do you see drones making a difference in the new frontiers as we go forward?
Thank you so much, Rupinder. Drones is the future of aviation. So, I mean, you'll be surprised if, I won't be surprised if 10 years down the line, in a Lufthansa plane or a British Airways plane, you actually struggle to find the pilot, because the pilot might be actually on the ground or maybe in an underground bunker somewhere.
Oh,
so that's the future.
Happening there, is it?
It's happening. It's happening. It's happening. It started with a military aircraft, lots of F-16s, and lots of, I mean, some of the projects we can't speak about, but even on the fighter jet side, it's already in process. And if you notice in space travel, these unmanned aircraft have been going to the space, to moon, to faraway planets without any human being on board. So this is not something new, and the same thing will gradually come into the commercial side. Of course, first we'll start with just simply surveillance, and in agriculture we see a lot of usage, especially in our country where there's a lot of manual spraying, and our Honorable Prime Minister is extremely determined to wipe that out. And drones gives us that opportunity to completely do away with manual spraying, because that's very bad for your skin, for your eyes, for your lungs. And because of poverty or whatever, I mean, because of lack of affordability, many farmers end up doing that. And that's not good for their health. And drones give us that opportunity where the farmer could just sit in, the drones could do his job maybe 100, 200, or 300 meters away from him, and do a very even spray. There's also precision agriculture where the drones can take the pictures of the leaf color and they break down the green into maybe 1 million hues of green. And they give you very precise advice of how much urea or potash or DAP or any insecticide, weedicide or a pesticide that you have to put in what quantity. So you actually end up using exactly this quantity which is required, rather than just spraying the same amount all over the place and wasting money and water and other resources. And then there's mining where you do so much of the coal stack, mine production, the volumetric assessments can be done in few hours, which normally take days to audit. I can just go on and now search and rescue, law and order. Even in the COVID times, police authorities all across the country in India used drones to do the surveillance and to warn people, and announcements. You would have seen that in Wuhan and other parts of China also, the same thing happening. Then on last year around May, June in Rajasthan, we had the locust attack, which came from the Pakistan side. And this typically, the swarms come every year, but the super swarms come once in 30 years. The last one was 1993. And last year, it was the worst attack in 27 years, where we had a locust swarm as wide as 30 kilometers. Can you believe it? It's like a black cloud engulfing you. An entire fields could have been wiped out, and that too during COVID first wave, when many of the people in Rajasthan had their sons and daughters coming back from the big cities, having lost their jobs because of COVID. And on top of that came this import of locusts, and we had to put in everything: the ground vehicles, the helicopters, and drones. And drones could do things where the ground vehicles couldn't go, in ravines and some of the low-lying areas, or areas where the ground vehicles couldn't go, or on treetops or very specific places where you could do pinpointed spraying using drones, because helicopters are overall spray, ground machines are limited by the terrain. So drones could do that work. So I can just go on and spend the next 1 hour, but I'll stop here just to say that drones are the new mobiles. And mobiles we use just for, like, I'm doing a video conference here in off location outside the my ministry, and you can just call and WhatsApp and download stuff on the internet. Drones will be mobiles plus, okay, plus maybe some 100 other things that you can do with the drones. You can even take a selfie. I'm sorry. You can even take a selfie will become a Delphi, and even your phone will become a drone. It'll have one click of a button, and some 4 arms will open up, and small propellers and batteries, and it will fly. And with the voice commands, you can start clicking photographs and move on and have a good time. So, and just take another 30 seconds. Just about in August, last 3-4 months have been very, very active on the drone policy front. We had a policy in March which was repealed based on a big public backlash that we got from academia and from industry, from startups. Even Honorable Prime Minister did pull us up, saying it was too tough on the security and the safety angle. So we have repealed that, and in August end, we have come up with a new drone policy, which makes it very, very simple. I'm sorry, we're just getting too many phone calls. Actually, I just stepped out of the Aviation Secretary's Pan-India Secretary's conference. Anyway, so cutting a long story short, so we come up with the new drone rules, which have made it very, very simple. No permissions required up to 400 feet for 85% of Indians' airspace. Normally, it was about 30-35 was green. Now it's become 85%, up to 400 feet. No permission required. Some 25 forms have been reduced to 5 forms. 72 types of fees have been reduced to just 4 types of fees, and that to some $1.5. So it's lots of things have happened. The paucity of time will stop here. But suffice it to say, drones will be the new mobiles. Rupinder, over to you.
Fantastic. So I think I need to go back and read some of my Isaac Asimov stories as to where are we headed for in times to come. But, on a lighter note, I hope the passenger flights are not going to go on without the pilots, because I thought the pilots are the most handsome of the guys always. So you don't want to do a flight without a handsome pilot, right? But
you'll have handsome pilots, but you'll have handsome pilots, but they'll be on the ground. They'll be on the ground.
All right. So we say bye to them and go in the skies. Fair enough. So thank you so much to all the panelists. It's been a most engaging and an extremely useful conversation. Unfortunately, we are short on time, and one would have loved to talk more. As I said, for me, for representing tourism, it is absolutely essential that a very happy, seamless, harmonized travel starts happening, not just domestic, but also internationally. We are waiting with finger toes, body cross, that travel starts really, really soon. And I can see a lot of effort being put by all of you to ensure that. So I am going to thank all of you, Virginia, Mieke, Shifali, Stephanie, Amber. And of course, at this note, I'm also going to bring in the chairperson of the Bird Group, the towering personality of travel and tourism in India, Radha Bhatia ji, because we need to have her have the last word on this one. She is an amazing woman. For anyone who doesn't know her, well, read about her and read the lovely books that she's been writing. I have one on lassis from her. It's how you do the Indian buttermilk, as we call it. And she's given it so many colors and forms, and it's amazing. So Radhaji, can we have you for the last word in?
Thank you, Rupinder. And I would like to thank all the panelists. I think we have overshot the time by about 12 to 15 minutes. All of you are so passionate to bring in more technology, more tourists, more hospitality, and more automation. And you can't forget the human resource. They say necessity is the mother of invention. And COVID has taught us new ways how we are going to have the new world. Whatever was lost in the last 2.5 years has to be gained. There have been a lot of job losses, unemployment. Travel, tourism, hospitality, and aviation are all interlinked. If one sector goes down, the others will automatically go down. Most important is aviation. And I think all panelists agree to this, and they are working on the same strive. I recollect 50 years back when there was everything manual. Even the manifest could not be sent on, what do you call, you forget about these automations, but telexes. And sometimes the manifest was supposed to be hand carried by the pilot. And I have seen in the last 50 years radical changes happening. And I will not be surprised what Amber said, that your iPhone can be converted into a drone. The younger generation have a lot of vision and a lot of exposure to the technology. And I'm sure some of these dreams of ours may come true. But we have to guide them and control them. You know, I was in a bad patch, and one day I got a dream. My son, Dr. Ankur Bhatia, told me, "Mom, why have you stopped your leadership summits? Why don't you start with that?" And I thought there would be nobody better than all my friends who are at the panel to take that dream forward. He was one of the stalwarts of the aviation industry, of the hospitality industry. He was like a spokesman. And today we are all together to fulfill his dreams. This panel discussion and this event would not have been successful without a proper moderator. And nobody else could moderate this session better than Mrs. Rupinder Barar. Can we all have a good clapping for her? Because being a revenue services officer, I think her DNA is tourism.
Thank you so much. It's an honor.
Stephanie, of course, I know for the last 5-6 years, and we have done IATA partnership training and many things together. Thank you, Stephanie. Mickey.
Thank you very much, Shada. Thank you.
You have been a great woman leader of Amadeus. And I'm sure this session would give you some more ideas to implement and to bring the technology into a better framework.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting me. was a pleasure to be here today.
Fali, who has been always a supporter for the Women in Aviation India chapter while she was Joint Secretary in the Ministry of Civil Aviation. With her immense knowledge and also her passion, she landed up in ICAO, and from there also she's giving a lot of support. And she is the first woman to reach ICAO as the India representative. 3 chairs for the women powers here.
Thank you, Radhaji. Thank you for this platform. It's a beautiful concept. Thank you so much.
In fact, it was so difficult to time out from Montreal to Singapore. And fortunately, Mrs. Juneja is here, so we can match. I think our friend from WTTC has already left because she was in another meeting. WTTC has been working relentlessly to bring in more destinations, more tourism, and guiding all of us. And last but not the least, the chivalrous person who told, what am I going to do between so many women? I said, there is always a man behind every woman. And I know he's the man who has changed a lot of things in the government as well as in the private sector. I think he is born to give a lot of inspirations and new dimension to the civil aviation. Thank you, Amber. Last but not the least, my team, Anjali, Rakhi, Anil, Rohit, thank you very much, because this time I have not been working so much. If there are any mistakes, please pardon. We are going to do a series more because the airlines, the airports, the hospitality sector, the tourism sector, they all have to be aligned together. So we will be working, and in case you have any suggestions, I would be glad to accept them. With this, I would say, I also thank all the people who have joined in and have gathered valuable inputs out of this discussion. Thank you very much, all the guests who have registered. The remaining can also see it because I have got some SMSs to say, please send us the Facebook, the Instagram contact so that we have not been able to register, and I would like to go through it. Thank you, everybody. And that comes to an end.
Thank you, everyone, and have a good
Thank you.
evening. Bye.
Good end of day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.